Shabbat Shalom, my friends, and also Moadim L'Simchah, because this Shabbat is the Shabbat that occurs between the two opening days of Passover and the two closing days. In the diaspora, that is to say, wherever Jews live outside of Israel, Passover in traditional communities is observed for 8 days, with the first 2 days and the last 2 days all considered Chag, full festival. In Israel, and among most Reformed Jews all across the globe, the 7-day observance of Passover also includes an opening day and a closing day, each of which is called Chag. The intermediate days are known as Chol HaMoed. Chol HaMoed, intermediate days of the festival. So April 11th this year carries the special designation of Shabbat Chol HaMoed Pesach, the Sabbath that falls during the intermediate days of the festival of Passover, complicated. Shabbat Chol HaMoed. So you know that we should be reading the Sedras Shmini this week, Leviticus 9, verse 1 and following, but we're not going to be doing that. Fear not. We will get to read Shmini next week. It tells a great story. We'll just have to wait a few more days. Instead, this week, for the Torah reading for this week, we will be reading Exodus 33, verse 12 to 34, 26, and Numbers 28, 19 to 25. Not a formal Sedra, 2 selections from other Sedrot. Why the change? Why the break in the orderly reading of the Sedras? Well, the Exodus passage contains, among other really wonderful narratives, a passage that reads, quotes, "You shall observe the festival of Matzot, of unleavened bread, in the month of Aviv, when you went forth from Egypt." It's in that passage. Okay, that works. Makes sense. What about the passage from Numbers? It also refers to Passover, laying out more of the particular requirements of the Chag. So there's no mystery here at all. The rabbis knew what they were doing, at least most of the time. But where things really get interesting is in the selection of the special Haftarah for this Shabbat Chol HaMoed Pesach. Tradition dictates that we are to read Ezekiel 37, 1 to 14. Ezekiel 37, 1 to 14. We know this passage. We know it really well. And it speaks to us this particular week, end of April 2020, in a way that is eerily appropriate. You can check the text out in the Plaut Torah commentary, pages 1465, 1466. Short. The Ezekiel passage is known as the vision of the valley of dry bones. Dry bones. Quote, "The hand of the Eternal was upon me, leading me out by God's Spirit and setting me down in the midst of a valley. It was full of bones. God said to me, 'Mortal, can these bones live?' I answered, 'O God eternal, you alone know.'" Close quote. It's 2020. We are surrounded by illness, by death, by fear, by uncertainty, and by the all too human penchant for seeking to allocate blame for things that we just can't understand. Pandemic. How exactly does that differ from epidemic? And what is an underlying condition? Will we really come soon to a period of triage when committees will decide who will live and who will die because of a shortage of medical equipment? Or are those decisions already being made behind the scenes in hospitals all across our country? And some of those hospitals already have too many patients than they can handle. Death in horrifying disproportion is visiting the homes of families of color. Our economy has collapsed in many sectors. Hunger and homelessness and the shattering of dreams are everywhere. Talk to college graduates. Even as investors with cash liquidity are entering the market in rapidly increasing numbers, buying up distressed stocks in the very reasonable expectation of incredible future gains. Ezekiel lived about 2,600 years ago, spending most of his adult life among the Judean captives who had been carried off to Babylon after the destruction of Solomon's temple. Our people wept by the waters of Babylon. Their despair and their fear were beyond measure. Their world had been decimated. Their homes were gone. Many of their family members had been killed. All that they had known and all that they had treasured had been ripped away from them. Does any of that sound familiar? Ezekiel was a Kohen, a member of the priestly class. He was a leader of his people, a people now languishing in dreaded exile. While never denying the current reality, Ezekiel had faith. Faith in God, faith in the eternal covenant, faith in the inexorable direction of the flow of history. A broken nation will rise again. A people now symbolized by dried out bones, a people just seen by others as dried out bones, will find their flesh restored, their very breath proclaiming that they are, in fact, alive. How does all this happen? What are we going to get? A new batch of miracles from God, blood and frogs and vermin and darkness, and then a sea that first divides and returns to its banks? Is this again how we will return to life? Listen to the text, Ezekiel. I prophesied as I had been commanded, and as I prophesied, there was a loud noise, and the bones came together, bone to matching bone. I prophesied as God had commanded me, and the breath came into them, and they came to life. The rebirth of our people, despite the living nightmare within which they found themselves, was not to be the product of divinely mandated miracles, but rather the rebirth would come about because of human agency. First, Ezekiel had to proclaim his message of national rebirth, and then, only then, a people buoyed up by hope and faith would make it happen. Ezekiel proclaimed his unshakable belief that even in the face of tragedy, his people could find their way from darkness into light. If they had faith in themselves, if they had confidence in the sacred truths that were the foundational pillars of their existence, they would get home again. Ezekiel never promised that things would once again be what they once were. Those who had died in the final defense of Jerusalem are indeed dead. Maybe in another life, another world, they might return to existence, but not now. The houses that were burned to the ground are no more, and Solomon's temple would not miraculously arrive out of its own wreckage. Ezekiel himself provided textual blueprints for the rebuilding of a temple, but that temple would not ever be the same temple that had been reduced to ashes. So, one vision of redemption is Passover. The rabbis who retold the story in the Haggadah almost always diminished the role of Moses and raised up the role of God. Fine. Another vision of redemption is the vision of the valley of dry bones. In that vision, God commands us to bring about the rebirth through our own faith, our confidence, and our trust. My friends, we have lost so much. We have lost so many. And we know that we will yet lose so much more. And we will lose so many more. We can hold tight to the Haggadah promise that redemption will come through God, Elijah, and the Messiah. Or we can hold tight to Ezekiel's promise that redemption will come through our faith, our courage, our resilience, and the power of community and human agency. But either way, whichever way we go, we Jews assert a worldview that redemption and rebirth will come to our sobbing world. That's it for today. Shabbat Shalom, my friends. Moadim L'Simchah. Be safe. Be safe to ourselves and be safe to those around us. Have a wonderful Pesach in all of its virtual diversity. And yes, we will see each other next week.